Hey everyone, we'll get started in a few minutes. I'm gonna mute myself, but I will share a few source sheets in the chat while we wait. We're gonna wait just 5 more minutes for people to actually gather, and I think there's still a few people joining. Let me just while we wait. So for those of you who have the source sheet from last time, I just shared it again, but that's the one we're gonna start with because we only got through about half of them last time. So we'll start off with them and then we'll move on to today's one, which I'm going to put the link for that now and then we'll reshare it later as well. Right, that was a link I just shared. Sorry, my bad. The link I just shared, that's for today, but we're going to start with this one, the one I'm sharing now. And I will share a PDF of this one as well.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hi, Don. We're gonna start in a few minutes. We're gonna start in 3 more minutes, okay? Just giving people a chance to join. Okay, hi everyone. We're gonna get going. I think there's still a few people joining, and myself between myself and Itamar will let them in as people join. But I want to dive in, so we have the whole like 85 minutes left for this last session. But I want to start a bit differently. So for those of you that were here the last two sessions, it will be different than the last two sessions as well. But for those of you, if you weren't, I know Audrey, we got you those source sheets. I don't know if you got the recording as well. Did you manage to get the recordings? Amazing, amazing. So we got some new people, some people that were here at the other sessions. But I want to start because this is the last session, and like I have some, obviously, as you see, like in the source sheet, so like I have some idea of where I want to go. And like, so the short version of today is going to be like landing, basically taking everything we know from all the other sessions, even though we didn't get through, I think, both the first and the second, specifically the second, we got through maybe half of the text, which is amazing. And I love that because it's about talking, it's about getting to know the the topics that we're talking about. It's about getting to know each other, and that's fine. So I want to make sure that I know we did that the first time, and a lot of you came in with something specific, but now that we have done this twice already, I literally got a pen and paper, and I'm gonna also write down, I want to make sure if there's one specific thing, or so this can go both ways. Either if there's one specific thing that we haven't touched on at all that you would really like if I touched on. And I will say about that, I can make no promises that we're gonna get to everything, but we can try. And then, or this is an and or, it could be something that we did discuss partially over the past two sessions that you are wondering more about and you would love for us to expand. So we'll spend the first part of today, we'll see how long it takes, kind of going through them and answering. But first, we'll just have everyone go through. Here's what I'm going to ask: say your name, if you feel comfortable sharing what your pronouns are. And then I want you to answer either both of those or one of those questions, which are, was there something, Audrey, can you mute yourself? Or can everyone please mute themselves if you're here? I can just mute people, actually. It's not a problem. Never mind. Um, so it could be like those questions, either if there is something about that you envision Kabbalah 101 to be about that we haven't touched on, that you would like us to touch on, and or if there was something from the past two sessions that you were unclear about, that you would like to know more about. So we'll spend the first part of today focused on that, and then we'll move to talk about kind of like bringing home everything else we have discussed so far. Okay, I'm just gonna go as I see them on the screen. I will say one other thing that I always say. I encourage people, if you feel comfortable to turn on your video, please do so. We do not care how you look or how you are dressed. You all are beautiful. That is a matter of fact. So if you feel comfortable putting on your video, I don't care if you're in PJs or whatever, as long as you're decent, put on your video so we can see your faces as well. Let's start with Jody or Sheila.
Hi, Jody, she, her. Um, I'm just happy to be here. I'm moving forward with this topic. I'm interested to hear more about how the like I know we talked about the individual stuff you wrote. I'm curious about the lines that connect them and what those processes sort of look like.
Lines, yeah, okay, great. And I mean, there is something in Kabbalistic language that is something called the yichud, which literally means the coming together, the unification. And we can talk a bit about that. And I will pull up again one of those. I think it was the first or the second session we had that figure. So we'll talk a bit about that. But love that. Great. How the lines connect. I love it. Okay. Audrey.
Hi. I don't know why that's doing that.
I think Audrey, you are connected with two. It seems like you're connected with two devices.
Not that I know of, but come back to me. I'll try.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Goldfarb. My pronouns are she, her, and I guess two things. One is I'm interested, I know we talked some about Shabbat. I'm interested in any more ideas about how to bring this beginning knowledge of Kabbalah into our, weekly practice, Jewish practice, daily awareness. And
Yeah.
also, if I may, just can I say one more?
Yes, you can say
Okay.
one more.
Any suggestions, Rabbi, that you would have for our next step in learning? If you are going to teach an extension of this course, I would love to join. Otherwise, if you have any other suggestions for next steps for us, that would be great.
Yes, I was definitely gonna put together a list. I wouldn't, so that I can answer now because that's an easy one. I will make sure we send it out to everyone over the next few days. Maybe it might have to be after Pesach with
Sure.
everything coming up, but we'll
Sure.
make sure to send out to everyone a list with some suggested further readings. I'm actually hopefully talking with Susan tomorrow. We'll figure out if there might be a continuation, a second course, an additional, maybe something that's related but not exactly related. We'll figure it out.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Audrey, I see now that you are in the waiting room.
I don't know where from. Oh, but now I'm not echoing anymore, right?
Now you're not echoing, so
No.
I'm not gonna admit that waiting room.
I have no idea what's connected because I went around
Okay,
changing.
never mind. As long as we're good now. So hi, Audrey.
Hi, I'm Audrey Weil, and I'm a member of the new Shul, she, her. And so I get the point about it's something that was enjoying ourselves, celebrating. Like Shabbat is an example of it. Like it's a celebration and a time to think. So, and Passover is coming up. So I'd like to integrate how this could actually be something that's useful to actually have in mind when we go into Passover and into any holidays.
Perfect timing for that. Yes, we're gonna talk about that. And I got like Passover in my throat just to make some points about it. But yes, there's a lot of Kabbalistic ideas throughout throughout the Seder specifically. Let me actually make sure I got what I was looking for here. Here, let me just, you reminded me, let me just look more book. Okay. This is a Hasidic Haggadah for anyone who wants to know. And yes, okay. We got more about that. Yeah, so we'll use some examples about the Seder that are easy to integrate for all of us, and so on. Amazing. And that will also be very good because it's going to tie into another part of what we're going to talk about today anyway, which is basically ourselves being a representation of all those worlds. Because a big part of the Sfirot are like, as we saw with the figure, and there's like the 10 Sfirot that represent also the four worlds. We'll explain that a bit more and how that ties into the 4 cups of the Seder. So we'll get to that. Let me just make sure I write it down. Okay, Samantha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Lobis, she, her. I'm very sad that I missed all the other classes. So I was just very curious. I felt that throughout my whole Jewish education and Jewish life, I've never learned about Kabbalah, so I was excited to learn about it. So I'm eager to read the materials that you sent and listen to everyone and try to catch up a little bit. Thanks.
Amazing. I will also say make sure to contact either Itamar or Susan at the new Shul, and they can send you recordings of the past few sessions as well. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but hopefully you will still, if there's any point today where you don't understand something, just let me know and I can try to explain it. Barbara.
Hi, everybody. I'm Barbara Schilkraut. Very much enjoying this learning about Kabbalah. And I'm interested in hearing tonight.
Okay, amazing. Ezra.
Hi, I'm Ezra, they, them. And I think I'm interested in like what like women and queer people and like people who have been like traditionally barred from Kabbalah, what they're doing with this content.
Okay, I love it. I will show an example today of what I have done with this content, but I think it's for everyone. Let me just say one thing. There's a lot of arguments that people can make about Kabbalah, but one thing that it isn't is cis and straight. For those of you who get that language, but basically Kabbalah is, I'm not saying it's perfectly and it's like progressive and it was like written in, and I'm not going to say the rabbis who wrote Kabbalah were the most progressive people hundreds of years ago, but it does have a lot of ideas and a lot of ways of thinking of ourselves, like what we'll get into later, about thinking of ourselves as a representation of the divine and what that means and the power that that gives us to be ourselves and so on, and what we can do with that. Don.
Hi, everyone. I'm Don Fate, a member, he, him. One of the things that we touched on a bit, and I believe I asked at the start when you asked these similar questions before, you know, how can we use the power of Kabbalah to vanquish our enemies? And I've thought more about that since, and I've thought, well, this should apply both to enemies that are, you know, clear and external, enemies that are imagined, and enemies that are, you know, simply artifacts of my own dysfunction. And no matter what, you know, I think it could be useful.
Well, I will try. I will try to touch a bit. It's, I think I mentioned before. I will I will at least get to explaining what that is, what we're talking about, and what Don is mentioning, and then we'll see if we can do anything with it immediately. Usually, for that, like what the Mukubalim or the Kabbalists would have told you is that you need to study your whole life to be able to do anything. But I think there's some ideas that could, at least on a personal level, less about vanquishing other people, but I think to work with ourselves, there's some we can do. Joy.
Joy Gordon from Minneapolis, she, her, and I really want to hear your gems of wisdom, but I love the idea of looking at the characters in the story and seeing how we have parts of that in all of us. And I think we have the masculine and the feminine, and Kabbalah does a very good job of integrating the two to say, yes, we have all of that. We are the Pharaoh and we are Moses, we are Miriam and we are Shifra and Puah. So how do we see ourselves in the story?
Yeah, okay, that's good. We're gonna have at least one text today that talks about that directly. So perfect. Okay, Judy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Judy Miner. I'm the president of the New Shul. Devastated to have missed the second session, but I have watched it. And I'm just thrilled to hear anything you have to say, Abby, pretty much about anything, but especially about Kabbalah. And I was going to say the same thing Audrey did, which was, it would be wonderful to think of something we could add to our Seders that is Kabbalah relevant. So thank you.
Okay, Shane.
Sorry, took me a few presses to get it to actually unmute.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Shane. He, him, and they, them both work. I apologize in advance. My camera will keep going on and off. I'm currently taking care of my mom who's having some health issues and I might need to keep leaving the room. I'm really excited to be here. If we get the chance, I'd love to learn a bit more about, I know some people who have like actual physical, like, you know, talismans that in some way like relate to Kabbalah, like who either do the red bracelets or anything, or like my great grandmother always like tied a red ribbon around all our cradles and everything so that Lilith would not steal the baby's breath and that kind of thing. Like I'd love to hear a little bit more about like the actual like kind of physical talismans and all people make that relate to Kabbalah. That comes up. I've loved everything in the class so far though, so whatever you end up teaching, I'm probably going to be excited by.
Amazing. I think I can be able to touch on it. That's one of those things that go way beyond Kabbalah 101, which is what this class is focused on. But I will at least the two things that you mentioned specifically, like how like the red ribbon, and to me in my head it went to the Yiddish like a rote Bendel, but the red ribbon and like the thing with Lilith specifically, I think are quite easy to like we'll bring that up and talk a bit about that. Yanko Akiva.
Hi everyone, I'm Yankel. I use they and them pronouns. I'm so glad that I'm close to the end because many people have already said things that I was wanting to say. So now I can kind of formulate them a little bit. I'm wanting to know how to do and be Kabbalah as a queer and trans person. I want to get a feel for the ways in which Kabbalah is meant for me and the ways in which I meant for Kabbalah. I know that's very abstract, but I'm going to leave it there for you.
I think it's beautiful. It's also something that, like, in the long term, there's so much to talk about. One of the books specifically, and I can tell you just right now, for anyone, if you're specifically on queer and Kabbalah, there's a rabbi and a professor who I'm also friends with, Rabbi Dr. Jay Michelson, who has written several books directly on like Kabbalah and queer theology, Kabbalah and queerness as a whole. He was one of the people that really helped me both like through his books and also in person to like get into that in a very powerful way. So definitely look up Rabbi Dr. Jay Michelson in some of his books, but we'll add more to the list when we get to that. Okay, we did Jane. Rain, are you here? I never know with the people whose faces I can't see. I can't tell where they are. Rain?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rain, they, them in English or as in they in Yiddish. And for me, any of what I'm most curious about and what means the most to me is understanding how the sort of spiritual things that can feel abstract, ephemeral, whatever, how they are grounded in the very real, practical, material reality, specifically in the material reality of relationship to land and ecosystem and place within it. And particularly, I appreciate people bringing things into the Seder, and particularly for me, this part about relationship to land and place and belonging in place, and specifically as an anti-Zionist Jew who was born in Jerusalem, specifically how these things can sort of queer and challenge certain ways that people claim belonging and claim land in ways that are more righteous, can we say? And how that relates specifically to the Seder, where we're all about to sit around and tell this story about a certain entitlement and claim to being freed in a certain way and to being promised a certain land. And how do we do that in a way that is more righteous and grounded in the reality of honoring the land and everyone on it, including other humans there? That was a ramble. Thank you for listening.
No, that was great and powerful. It is several of the lines that you said could turn into entire sessions on their own. And we're gonna try to like avoid, like we're trying to stick to the one-on-one, but we'll talk, I think, as we go through the Seder generally, because something that I would say is very interesting for me, like having been raised in a very religious community, and I find that people sometimes find that interesting, but like the Seder and Pesach generally for us was barely about the Exodus. And what I mean by that, yes, it was the Exodus, and we were told to believe that the stories happened exactly the way they happened, which is not something that I figure that most of us relate to necessarily in the literal sense of how the stories are told. But the bigger message of Pesach and the Seder has always been about like the contemporary, like what it means to us. Where like in Kabbalah generally, as something that I was going to mention anyway, in Kabbalah, when they talk about the exodus of like Egypt, they talk rather about the exodus from Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew word for Egypt, but also in Kabbalah, it's a combination of two words, which are Mitzar Yam. Literally, it means the straits of the sea, referring to like the straits, the kind of like the Nile Delta Valley. But more directly, though, it is used to refer to a narrow place as a whole. So like we'll see one of the texts later, that like the concept of B'chol Dor V'Dor, in every generation we have to see ourselves as we have gone out of Egypt, has never been about like the physical location, but rather about the concept of like leaving a narrow place. So a big part of what Kabbalah does to the Seder, and we'll see in a minute, go through them, the entire Seder, and go through the story generally becomes about our own individual and as a community kind of leaving narrow mindsets, leaving narrow spaces, and the entire Seder kind of becomes about that and about helping other people and about making sure, like the first line before we even get to the 4 questions is like, everyone who's hungry, come and eat. It doesn't say every Jew is hungry, come and eat. It says everyone who is hungry, come and eat, and so on. So definitely, like what Kabbalah has done to the Seder has definitely been making it a very contemporary, very about right now, about the here and now, based on our stories and our history. So thank you for that. Joni.
Hello.
Did you want to say anything else about anything specific you would want to learn about today, or you're good?
I just got here a few minutes ago, so I would like to just listen.
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to pull up while I wait for me just a second. Put up a very specific photo of the Seder plate that I will want to show in a minute. Leora, are you here? Leora? Okay. Leslie? Leslie, are you here?
I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm eating dinner.
Don't worry about it. Did you want to say hi?
Okay.
Leora also said in the messaging that she's here. Let me know if you want to say hi, Leora. Okay. So we'll move, we'll dive in. So let's start with I'm thinking actually. Let's start with I'm going to start with a photo of a Seder plate. Hopefully I can find it. Let's see, that explains it a bit. There we go. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is just the Wikipedia page from the that explains the Seder plate in Hebrew, but that's not the point that I want to show is something that we have seen before. However, before we're going to dive into that, we're going to go back to a different photo that we have seen before several times. But here, let's start here. So this is from our source sheet from last time. We're going to put in the chat box, so anyone who wants can also follow along, or you can just follow along on the screen. Oh, I think I sent it just to Itamar. Let me make sure I send it to everyone. There we go. If you don't get it, you can open it yourself, or you can just follow along on the screen. But just to go through like the very basics that some of you remember, the tense sefirot, keter, chachma bina dat. We explained that you use keter, crown, or dat. The idea for that being that Keter represents a world that is so far beyond our capacity to comprehend.
Rabbi Abby, could you
Yeah.
enlarge that a little bit, just so
Yes.
it's a little easier? Oh, oh, that's much bigger. That's great.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. I mean, for this I can enlarge it because we're just looking. So we got the top like 3, which are usually 4, but we only focus on 3. Then we get to the main, something that is called the seven midot, the 7 virtues, or that represent the 7 of the 10 sfirot, 7 of those 10 worlds. And those are the places where we mostly work. We got chesed, we got loving kindness, we got gevura, might, we got beauty, victory, and netzach, acknowledgement and hot, yesod as the foundation, and then malchut as kingdom or as the physical world that we have. Yeah, we all clear on that. We went over this many times. But now from here, we're gonna look at actually the source sheet from, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So I'm gonna need to pull it up. That had, even though you're gonna have to like, because I'm responding to everyone's questions, it's gonna be a bit moving between different sheets as things have come up. But I wanna next, before I get back to the Seder plate, specifically, who was it who wanted to know how they connect? Was it Jody? Yeah, who wanted to know this. So let me let's pull up our first source sheet from the first week. Assuming I can find it. This will also will be the same thing, but just to show the figures that we had. Don, I will get to you in a second. Let me just make sure I have the image I was looking for. There we go. So we're going to zoom into this a bit. This is what we discussed this on the first day. But I'm going to focus specifically here. So the first 3 and 4, as I said, they're more in the abstract, versus when we get to chesed and gevura, loving kindness, might, and so on, we get to the more like day-to-day. So we got here a total of 7. We got, and they're divided into like 3, and then final version. So we got the first one, which is like loving kindness, might, chesed, and gevura, and then tiferet is kind of like the balance in between them. Then we get the second, kind of that repeats itself, netzach, hod, and yesod. We got victory, glory, foundation, and then we get to malchut, we get to the world as we know it. The ways they connect, so you can all see the lines that are happening. Sure, Jody, do you see the lines that I'm pointing at and how they all connect? But more importantly, it's with everything that we do in the world, idea in a very basic way. So let's think of this. I know there are many parents in the room, so let's think about our own kids. There's ways of like when we just want to give them everything. So chesed would be the loving kindness. You just want to shower them. You want to spoil them. You want to just give them everything. You also know that there's a world behind your home where there's a reality. And sometimes, kids misbehave and you need to use a certain kind of gevura, a certain kind of like punishment. So that's kind of like where those two intersect. And it's talked a lot about in the context of like our relationship with the divine, but it's also literally talked. Kabbalah also calls chesed is called the father and gevura is called the mother, which is very interesting because most people, when they think about, at least stereotypically, when thinking about sexist, people think as fathers as being like the strong ones and the punishing ones, and the mothers as being the soft ones. But Kabbalah at least perceives mercy, loving kindness as more of a masculine feature, and gevura, might, as a feminine feature, which is something very interesting for all of us to think about. But beyond that, the idea is that those two interact with each other. But they would be like one day, you spoil your children too much. The next day you punish them too much. It's not balanced. So as you can see, as the way it connects, the very basic version, they all need, tiferet is beauty, but tiferet is also considered a balance. The beauty is when they are balanced. Not too much might, not too much love, but a lot of love and a standard amount of might in a way that represents true beauty. And they balance out. And then those all interact, kind of that happens again. It's not for 101 to go into all the details of the differences between as this happens twice, but ultimately comes down to malchut, to like what's also called in Kabbalah Olam HaAsiyah, the world, the physical balance, to kind of how they all interact with each other to create that balance. But let's put it this way, to think of it and going back to use our parental example, if you imagine the first three kind of love, kindness, mercy, strength, beauty, for when a child is like, let's say from when they're born until they become a teenager, and then you kind of, it's a whole new level when you got to repeat them. You got to repeat a similar process on a different level as a teenager, and then you hope that by the time they become an adult, you have a malchut, you have a kingdom, you have a physical world that is fully balanced. That is the short version of how they all connect. I'm going to stop here for a second and take questions for everything we just repeated, and then I want to bring the Seder into this. Let me just stop the share. And Don, I saw you have your hand up. If there's anyone else with your hand up. Don, did you want to ask something?
Myself. Hi. So my question is, as you were scrolling, I saw something that a fleeting image of it looked like a gold Seder plate, but the graphics look very similar to this layout. So could you pull
That's
that
what
up
we're
again?
getting at. Yeah, we're gonna get to that.
Okay.
That's what we're getting at next. Perfect. Yes, that is exactly. For those of you who have a Seder plate at home, if you want, if you have it easily accessible, I want you to bring it. Bring it over so we can, if you want, we can go through that directly. Not all Seder plates follow the Kabbalistic structure. Mine does, and we'll use this also as a helpful tool. But most Seder plates that have 6 will follow this structure, and we'll get to that and explain it in a minute. Not all of them do though, but thank you, Don. Okay, any other questions before we take all of this and we go into the Seder, which a lot of you have been asking about? Okay. Shira, can I, Amy, go ahead, yes.
I'm sure there's a lot to this question of balance, but I feel like I don't get it like at all. So you have chesed and gevurah, and then you have beauty. Is it that when the other two are balanced, you get beauty, or is it that beauty brings the other two into balance? I don't understand the balance idea.
The way a real Makubal, a real Kabbalist would answer that question would be yes and yes, no and no. I saw Joy Gordon is like shaking. But let's, for the sake of this, of 101, let's keep it. The short answer is yes, in a big way, where like the balance of that creates beauty. But that's the balance, like we're talking here about what's called the like Sheva Midot, the 7 virtues. So like the lower 7, like are called like, which are basically what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, are called like also virtues. So in many ways, think of this the same way as you would think of any other like the idea of virtues, the idea of having good virtues. A lot of them are like maybe things that are on their own. A lot of them are results of combinations of different things. So beauty, I would say it goes both ways. Like there's a certain value that Kabbalists put on beauty as its own, kind of like bringing beauty into a specific situation will create a certain form of balance.
Mm-hmm.
But the way, at least the way I understood it when I started out with Kabbalah when I was like a preteen, was always that like beauty is the natural result of balancing chesed and gevurah, balancing love and strength. But there's definitely a big point and argument to be made of like bringing more to it, bringing physical, bringing beauty into it. And I think this is actually good because the Seder has a lot, and that goes pre-Kabbalah, and there's a lot of, and I imagine a lot of us grew up with that idea that the Seder, that you make the Seder table as beautiful as you can. But in Kabbalah, it's like actually a custom in many Hasidic communities, like it was in my family. It was the only time of the year that we would put out nice dishes that we have, even though we weren't going to use it. So, and Kabbalists talk a lot about that at the Seder, to put out your nicest dishes that you have, whether it's silver or crystal or just ceramic, whatever you have nice dishes, to put it on the table, even though you're not going to use it at all. it's not very practical sometimes unless you have a huge table. So usually the idea is you can find a use of it. There's so many different dishes and so many different parts to the Seder that you can find a use for it. But there's definitely, for example, that value of bringing beauty and the power that that has, the power, the message that it sends on its own. So I think but everything in Kabbalah, it's a lot of a chicken and an egg.
Okay.
Where like what really comes first, and it's not, I wouldn't say that it's hard to pinpoint. The answer is yes and yes. It is that doing different things creates something like beauty, but there's also a value to just bringing that on its own, and that will help you balance. So kind of like it would be like, imagine if you have a certain beauty in you. The Talmud, for example, says that a nice partner, a nice house, and a nice house are like are very good to help someone settle their mind. That's a quote from the Talmud. This idea that when you are around something that you find beautiful, you feel better. Kind of similar to, psychologically speaking, and I don't know if there are any psychologists in the room, but there might be. A lot. Oh, you are. Yes. Like, and disagree with me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people, if it's a nice weather outside, you feel better as well. It's not everything.
Yeah.
You can still. I know. I personally, to give something a bit personal, I used to struggle with depression a lot, and the weather wasn't always the solution, but it could help. So it's this idea of sometimes you need the beauty to come out from balancing your different virtues, but also just bringing the beauty proactively has a lot of power on it.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Don, your hand is still up, but is that just from
Oh,
before?
no, sorry, I just haven't
No
lowered it.
worries, no worries. Any other questions? Okay. Jody, I know, I'm sorry I keep calling you Shira. My brain just naturally reads Hebrew before English, so yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. I saw you had a Seder plate. Do you want to hold it up? Put it a bit closer. Okay, so that is like a less Hasidic or less Kabbalistic Seder plate, but I love it. It's beautiful. Audrey, did you have your Seder plate as well? Let me see yours. Also the same. Okay, beautiful. Does anyone else? I'm curious if anyone has this kind. Okay, then I will show mine, and then we'll move to that photo. So this is something that I see some of you have seen before, but it's used throughout the Hasidic community and in most Kabbalistic circles, which you get the ro'ah, which is like the shank bone, the egg, the marrow, the bitter herbs, and it runs the same way. And then it repeats again with the charoses, the karpas, and chazeret. You all see what I'm talking about? Okay. Now let's go back to that photo that Don wanted me to bring back up. Here. So this is, as I mentioned before, from the Wikipedia on the Seder plate, and you saw some of them. So this is like the one that tends to be, I think, more common outside of Kabbalistic and Hasidic circles that some of you have had, which is just like basically a circle. But let's scroll down here, and I want to show you a different version. It's not a version, it's just a graphic. It's okay if you don't read Hebrew, but it's just a point. And in this Haggadah that I have, it does the same thing. So in addition to the big letters that you see in these in this graphic, which are just pointing out the different things that are on the Seder plate. I'm sorry, I didn't find one that has both of these in English, and I'm sorry about that. But so this is like the shank bone, the egg, it goes from right to left, the marrow, the bitter herbs. But then on top of that, there are additional smaller words, which are chesed, gevurah, tiferet, netzach, hod, yesod. And then at the bottom it says, and the kara itself, the plate itself, is malchut. So for me, I saw some of you are smiling and I'm loving it. Like it's like I didn't like this has been around. Like this is how the Seder was for me since I remember it. And like we have this like custom where before the Seder starts, you go through and you place all of them and you actually say out loud their Hebrew words. So like for the Shengo, you say Gezeroah, and then you say Chesed, Beitzah, Gevurah, Maror, Tiferet, and so on. So there's a few interesting things that are happening. So the Seder plate, which is literally, making Seder, which just means making order of the Seder, represents, at least Kabbalistically, so pre-Kabbalah, and like there's still some people who have that custom, it actually used to be more common to just have 4 things on the Seder plate as opposed to 6. So the whole concept of having 6 things on the Seder plate is a Kabbalistic custom, along which, like we said before, like the custom of Kabbalah Shabbat, all those like that we know that's today common among all Jewish communities as a 16th century Kabbalistic edition. That's the same thing with the 6th thing that most even people who know nothing about Kabbalah nowadays have on your Seder plate. And if you realize also, you can tell that some of these things are kind of useless. Chazeret is like one of those things that everyone puts something else. There's different customs. We actually just put the head of a horseradish, like a whole horseradish, and that's what you put. Some people put there's different customs of what you put for it. But the point is that Kabbalistically speaking, the Kabbalists see, the Mukobalim see the Seder plate as literally every part of the Seder representing a different one of those, the Esses Firot, one of the 10 Sefirot, and specifically the mitzvot, as I've said before, the lower 7 that are called the virtues, and how we deal with it. So Zeruah is a good example of Zeruah represents mercy. The most simple version of it is based on a verse in the Torah where God says, I will take you out, which is stretched out arms. Zeruah literally means an arm. So Shengbon is supposed to represent the arm of an animal, a 4-legged animal that doesn't necessarily have an arm, but that's what it represents. And it represents also, as well as it being remembering the sacrificial, the Paschal lamb, it specifically refers to God's mercy of stretching out God's arm and bringing us home. So in many ways, the Zroah, the moment that represents mercy. Beitzah represents an egg. Traditionally, I don't know if everyone does it, but traditionally you do a hard-boiled egg. There's many different reasons and customs, but in Kabbalah specifically, there's a big focus of the egg representing mourning, actually. Because like tradition is also might be Kabbalistic or even a pre-Kabbalistic tradition is that after someone passes away, the first meal, the people who are sitting Shiva eat an egg. It represents, because an egg is round, it represents the circle of life. There's also this teaching in a Hasidic text where the same night of the year, the same night of the week that Passover falls, also falls to Shiva Av. That happens every year in the calendar. So it's also like, it's a moment of also representing strength, representing destruction. We were talking earlier, Rain, you brought up about thinking of like grounding in the Seder, all the bad things that are happening. It's a moment of celebrating, but it's also some bad moments. And Beitzah, specifically a hard-boiled egg, it represents mourning, represents hard times. I know Kabbalah could get very metaphorical and taking it very literal. Like a big part of thinking of bringing Kabbalah into our day-to-day life is thinking something that's supposed to be a metaphor and actually doing it. The Kabbalists were big, like we had last week, we mentioned it about Shabbat, for example. Shabbat is like we go out and welcome the Shabbat bride. What they would do is they would literally, physically go out into the forest and welcome the Shabbat bride, even though the Shabbat bride isn't a physical person. And like you can welcome them in your living room just as much. And to this day, we have the custom of facing the door as we say, Bo'i b'shalom, come in peace. It's like the Kabbalists were huge fans of doing something physical to represent the metaphysical and the metaphorical. So that is a lot with that. So it's like and then we got, so this is very interesting though, because what becomes the balance of that becomes maror, the bitter herbs. The balance between the mercy of a stretched out arm and the hardship of mourning, the hardship of a hard egg, is actually a bitter herb. There's a lot to talk about. I remember asking my dad that question of like, how is bitter herbs beautiful, when I was really young. And there's a lot of different like Kabbalistic reasons, and it's some of it I don't love necessarily, based on this idea that which is something that is mentioned in the Bible also, at Asher Ye'av Adonai Oto Yochiach, someone that God likes, God is like telling them like you're doing something wrong, or that you only complain about someone's action if you care about them enough. A lot of different ways of looking at it. But maror, the bitter herbs, represent kind of that balance of that beauty. And that goes on. I don't want to focus on this. We only have 45 minutes left. I don't want it to be all the focus of that. But the entire Seder plate specifically represent that balance. And I will simply like to give you first, and there will be a few more, but logical things that you can all take in your Seder, is make it a bit personal. Think of what those things represent you. And if you really want to go, off the derech, as we would say, you want to go off the path and create your own. My Seder plate every year includes a lot of things that are not traditionally, including like an orange and a pomegranate. I'm not going to go into all the details, why I do that and what they represent. But you can also think of when you want to think what is mercy, what does represent mercy? It can be the shank bone, it can be something else. And you can use that on your Seder plate. You can do the same with the egg. You can do the same with the bitter herbs and all the other ones. Just keep it, if you want, I'm not going to say go get a new Seder plate. A lot of you have beautiful plates, but if you want to implement that, it's very easy. And you can do that even if it's in a circle. It's the same idea of thinking what they represent to you in the day-to-day life, not just in the abstract, not just to remember that Charo said because our ancestors were making like lime and they were making bricks and so on, but more like, what does it mean to you? And then the idea that the actual plate represents our physical world, represents kingdom, represents Malchut, which both refers to the physical Seder plate, but also to the entire table at the Seder. But we're not done. There's an additional custom that I imagine a lot of you know, and which is to have 3 matzot. There's a custom that the Seder plate, like you put it on top of 3 matzot. You can put it on top of more, but tradition is on top of 3. They represent all the Jewish people. They represent Kohen, the priests, and then Levi, like the Levites, and then Yisrael, all of them. But Kabbalistically speaking, and I don't know how, for those of you who read Hebrew, you can see it here, they also represent Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at. So the 3 matzot once again represent the 3 upper parts of the SSP road. And again, I encourage you all to think of what does it mean for you for a matzah to represent priests? What does it mean for you for a matzah to represent Levites? For a matzah to represent Yisrael? I think of Yisrael a lot as the concept of the literal meaning of the name for the Jewish people, Israel, meaning like God wrestlers, which is the etymology that the Torah gives for that name, and so on. But that is one of the things that I wanted to point out. But then we also get to the 4 cups. I'm gonna close this out. I'm just looking if there's anything else that could be helpful in those photos to point out. I think we're gonna move ahead. Okay. So we had, let me make sure I find it. We also had a text about the 4 worlds. Let's see. That was during our first class. Give me just a second.
Abby, do you have
Yes.
something that you could share that kind of summarizes these connections and metaphorical meaning?
With the Seder specifically?
Yeah.
I have to look. I think I do. I think I can email it. I'm not like, I mean, the only things that come to mind right now are all in Hebrew. So in English, I wasn't planning to dive into this today, but I wanted to ask it. I wanted to get into what people wanted to talk about. Sorry, I apologize for scrolling through. I just want to see. I think we went through the 4 worlds. Does anyone remember if we did that? I think we did. Yeah. Not finding you here. So we're going to go out of here and I will come back. So we had the worlds of Atzilut, Beri'ah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. In Kabbalah, there's also, in addition to all those Sfirot, they're all divided into sometimes together, sometimes separately. But just let's go over those 4 worlds. So Atzilut is like the brain, the part that comes up with ideas. It's the part of Chachma, Bina, and Dat, which are different versions of knowledge and understanding. That refers to the idea of Atzilut, which is the moment of knowledge, the moment of recognizing. Then there is Beri'ah, the moment of creation. And that refers to the usually kind of like the in-between, but the second 3, which refers to creation, refers to the idea of physically, of making things, of creating. Yetzirah, Bria is creating, Yetzirah is making something with something that already exists. So the next 3 our creation, but like the difference between Bria, creating something from nothing, and Yetzirah would be like the difference of like, let's say, creating metals, and then Yetzirah would be making something with the metals that you already have. And then you get to Malchut, which is also called Asiyah, the physical world, where all of those comes together. Let me repeat that. So we got the brain, the Atzilut, the one that comes up with ideas. We got the creation of the physical material. We got making those material into whatever we want it to be. And then we get the Asiyah, the world of actually doing. So those actually also come to represent the 4 cups. The first cup, which is Kiddush, it's the moment of sanctification. It's the moment, and this is something that we can all do. And I want to explain that a bit in a day-to-day, like how you can do it at your Seder in a very logical way for people who know nothing about Kabbalah. You can, if you want, and obviously you don't have to do it that way, but the moment of the first cup, which represents Atzilut, it represents the brain, represents the idea, it's done over Kiddush, which is a moment of sanctifying. It's literally a moment of consciousness. The first cup represents being conscious, being aware of what we're doing, being aware of what we're representing, being aware of the people who aren't free as we celebrate freedom, being aware of the land that we are on. It's Kiddush. Kiddush is literally a moment of sanctification. It's the moment of recognizing. So that is the knowledge. Chochmah Bina Dat, Atzilut, that represents the first cup. And if any of you want, you could look up, I mean, I'm sure there's some English versions. I will try to find one and share with all of you. But in most Kabbalistic Haggadot, there is a prayer that is said before every cup. And again, like I will find an English version and share with all of you. There's a prayer that says in every cup, and you say, I am now coming. I'm coming to make Kiddush on the wine. And and to do the mitzvah of drinking the first cup, which represents Atzilut, and in this specific context, it's going to represent the name of God. So let's find this. We need another. I know, I think we had it in some of our previous source sheets, but I'm just going to find it quickly. Definitely a good graph, but again, this is all responding to what people want to talk, so it might take me a second to find it. Let me try it in Hebrew. No luck here. If I find it, I will have to share it in that email as well, and that follow-up. Okay, but the idea is that if you write out the letters of Yud Hey Vav Hey, the letters of God's name, they represent both the human, like the Yud, the head, the small version represents the Yud, the first letter. The Hey with the 2 parts represents kind of like our stomachs, our hands. The Vav, the like straight down, represents our like private parts. It represents Yesod. And then the second Hey represents our 2 legs. So they also correlate with those 4 worlds. So the world of thought, the world of Atzilut represents the first Yud, and that is the first cup. And one of the other things that are in those Kabbalistic prayers is every one of those cups also represents a ruach, certain spirit. So the first cup represents the ruach shtut, which literally means, for the lack of a better translation, BS, stupid things that shouldn't exist in the world. And that is as we think, as we center ourselves, as we're conscious of where we are, the land that we're on, we're conscious of the people around us, and so on. That represents the first cup. I don't want to go through all of these because it's going to take up all of the time, but you get the idea, basically, where the second cup and I'm gonna pull it up so I can translate it, which is done after Magid. So after we have finished kind of like saying the whole story, we're getting close to kind of like eating the meal. And the second cup represents the second letter of God's name. It represents the world of creating, and so on. So all like 4 cups represents the 4 letters of God's name, but more specifically, if you want to take this into your day-to-day, not day-to-day, into your physical Seder, being conscious and being aware of every letter and what it represents, and you can make them up as you go. Just think of what does the letter Yud, what does Hey, Vav, Hey, what does the idea of mind, creating with the mind, creating materials out of scratch, creating something beautiful with existing materials, and then finally the last cup, the physical world, what that represents to you, and kind of implementing that in your Seder. Okay, there's a lot more to talk about the Seder, but I want to get to some of the other things. I think I've given up on getting maybe to some of the text that I wanted to get to today, but at least of putting this in. And I think, Amy, you had mentioned generally like your question was like how to bring more of that into our day-to-day lives. I think like the Seder is another example of that. But I think the other thing that every Kabbalist will tell you about, and there's a thing, I might have mentioned that either the last time or one before, but there's a Hasidic saying that the most beautiful or the most holiest version of fasting is to do that while you eat a bowl of soup. That the most, so there was a custom in medieval times of people who wanted to like forgive their sins, that they would like roll in snow, and kind of the pain for that would forgive your sins. And the Baal Shem Tov said the holiest form of rolling in the snow is to do that while you're comfortable in your warm bed covered with your blanket. And so on, it keeps going. The idea of it is that it's what is in your mind. It's why you're doing it. Like everyone can be like, I want to be pure. I want to make up for something, so I'm going to fast. But and I think we see that a lot in like the political world and in other places where people are trying to do something that is about to make themselves feel better than actually accomplishing something. If you're going to fast a lot of fast days, you might feel like your body is getting pure, but you can't cope. You can't be a normal person. The real idea of fasting here as a metaphorical idea is in your day-to-day life to do it for the right intentions. Like a way of fasting, hypothetically, in that context, could be eating for the right reasons. More specifically, let's say that every time you eat, you feed people that are hungry. We did that. Some of you might know we did like a break fast kind of that was like an interfaith break fast iftar before Purim, and a big part of what we did is looking on the idea of fasting. Is the Talmud says that the real gift that you get from fasting is the charity you give to poor people, to people who are hungry, and so on. So the idea isn't like it's with everything in our day-to-day lives. When you get an urge to feel like I want to feel holy, I want to fast, instead, no, eat. Just be conscientious of where your food comes from. Think about the people who can't eat. And that goes into our Seder. It goes into every Shabbat. There's a custom that many people have that every Friday night before candlelighting, you give charity. And a big part of that is because people tend to eat a lot more on Shabbat. And a way of being, and it's not don't. The Kabbalists never tell you don't eat a big Shabbat meal. It's quite the opposite. Go and eat a big Shabbat meal. But also keep in mind the people who can't afford. And I'm thinking a lot about it this year, about like Pesach, can we really celebrate freedom when tens of thousands of people are getting killed, when like people are like suffering through so much, when people are not with their loved ones and people are not home, like there's so much that's going on in the world. And there might be an urge to be like, okay, we're not doing it. But what Kabbalah will tell you is, no, you keep doing what you're doing. Just do it for the right reason. Be conscious of what you're doing. Donate it to charity. Like you sit down to eat and just being mindful of that moment. This doesn't, to me, that is spirituality. And it sounds like I'm removing the spirit from it, but to me, that is exactly what it's about. It's about finding meaning in it, and it doesn't have to be radical. It's the non-radical that is really impressive. You know, as I said, everyone can fast. Everyone can be like, I'm torturing myself by being outside in the cold, but it's not the point. I hope that helps and like gets to your question a bit. And I know, like Audrey, we already got that. Okay. I'm just looking through some of those questions. Okay. So we're getting to, there was several questions about like queer people, about people, and so on. So I want to get for this, I want to get to our source sheet that I was going to use for today and go through that a bit. Specifically focusing, for those of you that were at my Hasidic 101 class, there was most of those texts actually in that class as well. But to me, like I want to focus now on how the Kabbalistic parts come into being for that, and as well as the Seder as well. Give me a second, I will reshare that with you, all of you, in the chat, and then we'll share it as well. Open it on your phone, and I will share the screen. Talking about the four-letter word of God's name. Talking about, as I said, like how God's name represents our body, right? Yudhevavai, do we all remember that? Let's dive into this. Does anyone want to read Exodus 17:16?
Can you make it a little larger?
Yes, we'll make it larger.
There you go.
You want to read it?
Oh, okay. Exodus 17:16. He said, it means hand up the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages.
Bad translation here because it doesn't represent a lot what we want, but we'll see that in a minute. But here, the word for, which is we translate as Lord, here, instead of the four-letter word, kiyad al-kes ya, it only has the two letters.
Mm.
And the same, the word for throne, usually the three-letter word, there will be an aleph at the end of it. Here, it's missing. It's only a two-letter word. So we get Rashi here. Does anyone want to read this? Rashi on Exodus 17:16 too. Any volunteers, or do I need to call on someone? Don, go for it. You're muted, Don.
Before I read and we continue, can we just go back to the previous line?
We're gonna do that right now. The next reading is gonna go back to the previous line.
Okay. Rashi on Exodus. Because the hand is upon the throne of Yah, what is the force of
Samach. So basically, there's like only two letters, a kaf and a samach. For the why does it not say, as usual, a three-letter word for throne? Keep going.
and the divine name also is divided into half.
Yud-Hey
is only the half of the tetragrammaton. The Holy One swears that his name will not be perfect, nor his throne perfect, until the name of Amalek be entirely blotted out.
This is an interesting verse where it doesn't go into a lot of details, and we'll explain that in a minute. We'll see some of the other texts. But basically, the problem that we have here is that when it's talking about God at that specific moment, the throne isn't whole, and the name of the divine isn't whole as well. There's something lacking. And Amalek, specifically in Kabbalistic teachings, isn't referring to any specific physical people, but rather to an idea. An idea specifically, one of the definitions, one of the ways the Torah describes Amalek is Ashekorcha Baderech, which is not directly, but as a interpretive teaching, translated as someone who has made you whole, something that cools you off from doing what you were supposed to do in the world, something that makes you go away or not focused on your message. And it's very often used in early Hasidic teachings to talk about people, for example, who are so focused on following law as opposed to what's behind it, as opposed to what's the meaning of your actions and so on. So I wanna go through some of these quotes from a book called Radical Judaism about kind of like the literal meaning, which is it's a modern book, but it's based on like Kabbalistic ideas of what God is and what God means. And we definitely had this text on our last class, but I will read through that quickly. Being, or Yud Hey Vav Hey, which we now understand also to mean both that the literal meaning of that word in Hebrew, at least one of the etymologies of the meaning of the word is being or existence. But in this case, also that represents the physical body. It represents each and every one of us. Being, or the four-letter name of God, underlies and unifies all there is. There is no ultimate duality here. There is no God and world, no God, world, and self. Only one being and its many faces. When I refer to God, I mean the inner force of existence itself, that of which one might say being is. I refer to it as the one because it is the single unifying substratum of all there is. Being is one, and each person is God's unique image. One more text, and then I will bring this home for a minute. Does anyone want to read this? Unatana Tokev. It's a quote, a translation from High Holiday, from Rosh Hashanah prayers. Any volunteers? Joni? Go
I'll
for
read it, yeah.
Joni, yeah.
Unetane Tokev. Let us tell the utter holiness of this day, Rosh Hashanah, for it is tremendous and awe-inspiring. And on it your dominion shall be exalted, your throne established in loving kindness, and you will sit on that throne in truth.
Thank you. And I hope you have this very well known that we have mentioned many times. Every person is created in the image of the divine. I'm gonna skip this ahead and then we'll come back to that in a minute. But I want to kind of like recap and make sure we all understand what we all just had. I'm not here to tell anyone what to believe and what to not to believe when you think about God, but in this specific context, when we talk about God or the divine or being or Adonai or Yud Hey Vav Hey, we're talking about existence. We're talking about each and every, I said, like each and every person represents in a very physical way, represents that name. More importantly, we are all we're all created in the image of the divine. And then where the Kabbalists take it to the next step is where what we call God, or what we call Adonai, or Yud Hey Vav Hey, is the sum total of all there is. It is not a duality. It is not God and humanity. We become part of that. I mentioned before about Kiddush, like how Kiddush represents the first letter, represents the head, it represents being conscious, being aware of what you're doing. It literally means sanctifying. The Talmud says that when you make Kiddush every Friday night, you became a partner to God in creation. Now, while most people see this as God as the creator and you become a partner of it, the way we think about it in Kabbalah is we are all part of this. We are all God. We are all divine. Like the way I like to say it, and something that I learned from Reb Zalman Schachter, some of you might have heard, it was like by many considered like the father of Jewish renewal. And he would say that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? But anyway, like we are, there's no separation here between God and each and every individual person. We are God. It's just the word I was gonna say, like it's just a word that people use. There's a term in the Talmud where they say we use a borrowed term, where a word doesn't really describe what we're trying to say, but we're trying to use a word that we understand. When the Kabbalists talk about God, they're not talking about God the way most, let's say, people in the Western world think about it, of this like creator, or what I call the boogeyman in the sky. You don't. I would say that many Kabbalists didn't even believe that God exists, which is how like you learn a lot of Hasidic texts and you start thinking they were atheists. And in some academic way, perhaps they were, like in the literal way of a deistic God that is separated from humanity and has created everything. But rather, God is a word. As I said, Zalman used to say that some people, call it God. Some people call it Jesus. Some people call it Allah. Some people have, millions of different words for it. But at its core, it's humanity trying to make sense of what's around it, and we use a word to talk about the sum total of all there is. And that is what this represents. And that is what each and every one of us represents. I want to bring this home both to the question about like queer people, that refers to everyone, but I think queer people sometimes have to take that step of being who we are and how that represents in Kabbalah, and also as well as Pesach. I want to go to the next text that's going to do both. So this is the intention setting. We were talking about intentions earlier. And I think I might have mentioned it to some of you. I might have to some of the previous sessions, how when I came out as a trans woman, I had a coming out celebration. We did a ritual, we did a bat mitzvah calling up to the Torah. But one of the things that we did is that I walked through kind of like the aisle, kind of like the narrow aisle, came up to the bima of kind of like to embrace who I am, to embrace that moment. And this was the intention setting of before that. Does anyone want to read it?
I'll read it. In our tradition, leaving Egypt wasn't an historical event alone. In our tradition, it was a personal and existential leaving as well. Every generation, a person must regard themselves as though they personally had gone out of Egypt. Whenever we leave a narrow place, a place of constriction, painful servitude, a place where we are not authentically who we are, that leap taking, that transitioning is an exodus, a freedom walk.
Thank you. I think you're all starting to get where I'm going with this, and it becomes quite obvious here. But this is both like the Kabbalistic idea of if we look back for a second, the name of God isn't whole. There's something lacking. What is God even in this Kabbalistic idea? What is Yud Hey Vav Hey? When there's part of the body, the physical body that's missing, what is this? It's each and every one of us. What is the concept? What is Passover? What is Pesach about? It's about this moment of being in a narrow place and coming out to be fully who you are. Whatever action that is, whether it's a more intense coming out that a lot of us queer people experience, or whether it's something smaller, I think we each have small coming out moments in our lives. I hate the question people like, when did you come out? And I have dates that I can use for that, but it's a daily journey. It's a daily practice of trying to be even just being a better version of yourself means that you are taking the Yud Hey Vav Hey, like you're taking the physical manifestation of that name. And again, this could be a very traditional, if you relate to a traditional version of God, great, and you can relate to it that way. But even if you don't, even if you are here, and I imagine there's some of you here, like you think you're a total atheist, that's a very weird thing. From an academic point of view, you can be an atheist, and then Kabbalistically, you can be the strongest believer on the planet. Because the idea here is to relate on your own personal way. Because Yud Hey Vav Hey, Adonai, Elohim, it's not something that is out there, it's something that we all create. It's something that we do at our Seder, when we mark that moment of leaving that narrow place. But more importantly, I think what Kabbalah teaches us, and what really, it's not just Kabbalah, I think I said that at the beginning of the first class, what the Kabbalists really believed is that they didn't invent anything. They didn't think that they invented Kabbalah. They believe this to come directly out of the Torah. They believe this to come out directly from Jewish practices. And a lot of those ideas you can see from the beginning. If we think that every human being, and it's very important, and I've been saying this a lot over the past few months, I would say, unfortunately, that it has to be said, that it doesn't say that all the Jews were created in the image of God. It doesn't say all the good people, all the religious people, or the people who behave a certain way. Every person, every human being is part of that. So if you don't allow people to be fully who they are, I'm not even going to talk if you support killing people. We're not even going to go there. I'm talking if you don't fully support every person being who they are, you are participating in the act of what Amalek has done in the Kabbalistic understanding, what the Mekubalim understood. You are removing letters of God. I mean, for those of us maybe who grew up with the Seder, just imagine the Seder just being 2 cups. It's not the same as 4 cups. I mean, it's just an emotional thing, but it's how we grow up with it, how we use it, like, because that is the full body. And if you want to sit down to the Seder and be like, how do I bring this Kabbalistic idea that the 4 cups represent the 4-letter the four letters of God's name in that the entire Seder, all the acts that we do between the matzot and the like Seder plate and the actual table represent all those virtues and all those moments in all those moments. The only way to do that really is by at the same time to make sure that every human being that we do the best we can, that every human being has everything they need, that every person can be a full person. And in Kabbalistic ideas, when we say at the beginning, before the four questions, before we start the Haggadah, in the Halach Ma'anya, there's the phrase called Dichven Yeseh V'Yechel, which is Aramaic for everyone who needs, everyone who is yearning should come and eat. It's not just that it's the good thing to do. For the Kabbalists, it's intertwined. If you are not feeding people, if you're not helping other people, there's part of our understanding of the sum total of the universe is lacking. This is very literal. You don't have to believe in anything. You don't have to buy into mystical ideas to understand that if you want the universe to be a better place, you need to take actions to do that. That is what Kabbalah is. And I'm gonna stop in a second to take some questions before we end, but I think I want to take this to come back to Dan's question about how to vanquish our. In Kabbalah, this is called the concept of using Kabbalah to physically like manifest things in the world that aren't a direct result of our actions. So let's say there's a lot of Kabbalistic prayers where you're calling on angels, you're calling on different names of the divine that can accomplish certain things. It's something that's called Kabbalah Masiyot, which is this idea. It's like a part of Kabbalah that refers to physical actions, to kind of like implementing Kabbalistic practice and making something happen in the world that goes beyond just like natural cause and effect. And as I said, that goes way beyond Kabbalah 101. But on a more direct way, and I'm sorry if that isn't the answer we were looking for, but in a more direct way, what the Kabbalists would tell you, like in a very basic version, is that Kabbalah is about being conscious and being aware of every action that you take. By you being a better person, or by you trying to figure out how you bring all four letters of the divine, or how you create a Passover table. And if you can't have someone physically there, you can donate to people in Gaza who are starving, or you can donate to people in your own community that are starving. You can donate to wherever it is that people need food and help. When you do that, you are physically creating, and I would say vanquishing your enemies as well, because by doing something good in the world, it's just your enemy, there's less of a choice, there's less of a chance for your enemies to be created. But there is a bit more, and I think I want to come back to what Shane, this will tie into what Shane was asking specifically about, like talismans and kameot, which fall into, Dama, you were saying like this Kabbalah Masio, this like physical action. And one of them, and I want to show actually a photo of this. So Shane, what you were mentioning about something to protect you from Lilith, there's something called, there's a very old talisman, a very old called in Kabbalistic text, a kameah. I will share it. Let me just find a good version of it. Okay. This will do. So this is probably one of the oldest versions of one of the oldest like popular, what's called a kameah, popular talismans used in Kabbalah a lot. It's several hundred years old, and specifically the main part. The side around is more like like commentary and whatever. But these specific ones, these are filled with different names for God, and then a lot of them here. The line here, which is part of Dasma, says Lilith v'cholkat delai chutza. Lilith and all of her people go outside, get away. And then it has verses. It has verses from the Torah and other parts, but mostly it's just like a lot of names of God in Kabbalistic understanding. And then this is something together. It becomes a talisman. It becomes called a kameah, and then you hang it up. My family still does this every time For the first 30 days of a baby, this hangs on the baby's back, and it's common in a lot of communities. I will say personally, I'm not a huge fan of these kind of things. I'm a bigger fan of taking actions that make sense and like putting it into the physical world. But that is a whole. I don't think there's a space for this in a Kabbalah 101 class. So maybe if there's a lot of requests, we can go into that more. But it's something that has existed for a long time. And I would say, but even like something like that talisman, like hanging it up in babies, or like the red string that people put around. The way I see it a lot is that it's a physical manifestation of our wishes. So instead of me being, it's kavanah, exactly. Instead of being like, oh, I'm going to hang this up and this is magically going to help, it's like by hanging this up, I'm taking a physical act for shmirah. So that specific talisman that I showed you all is called a shmirah, something that they translate shmirah, something that watches over you. But I would say it's less about that specific paper watches over you as much as it's that the parents having the conscious mind to being like, this is the bed, and hanging something up, meaning you are watching over it, your physical act. And I would say the same with the kameya, the same with the talisman that is very popular, like a lot of people used to, people still do it, of wearing it as a necklace, or the red string. It's less about what that red string hypothetically in a metaphorical word represents, as every time you wear it and you look on it, you feel it, it's a physical reminder. It's what the Torah says about tzitzit, right? In Kabbalah, there's a lot of talk about tzitzit, about the strings that we wear, whether it's on a talit or on a small version of it, that it's like, oh, it represents God, represents remembering. But it literally says in the Torah, "Uveitem oto uzichartem." You will see it and you will remember. It's a very basic human understanding of writing down. I know a lot of in therapy, that's a lot of things about writing something down and having something that is physically going to remind you. It's not that doing that is going to magically vanquish your enemies, but rather that doing that will remind you of what you were doing. It will remind you what you were dedicated to. Like you hang up something to watch over your baby will constantly remind you to watch over your baby. Like wearing a red string will constantly remind you to keep in mind, like it's supposed to be something that you use against a ayn hara. You translate that a bad eye? Not a bad eye. What's the word for that? Evil eye. It's again, instead of being like, oh, this is magically going to take away the evil eye, it is by doing that, I am being conscious of what are other people going to think? How am I impacting other people? Like there's so much in Kabbalah about ayin hara, about an evil eye. But all of it comes down to what the Talmud says about it. But the Talmud says someone who cares, then it will impact them. If you don't care, it doesn't impact you. That's the idea of your consciousness, the idea of thinking about it. And then what Kabbalah becomes a lot, and even specifically the way Hasidic teachings see Kabbalah, is taking physical actions to represent that. Doing a Seder play that physically represents love and might and the beauty. It's not necessarily, and yes, there are people who will look at it that way, but at least the way I understand it, it's not necessarily, oh, that I'm going to put my Seder plate in that specific way and that's magically going to accomplish something. In Judaism, we're less about magic. We're more about you do magic because there is a physical result of it. Because if we put something on our table to physically remember the morning of our Seder table, like a hard egg, it's going to make us remember. When we say the words, everyone who is hungry, come and eat, it's not that magically now we're going to fix the whole world. It's going to physically remind us there are hungry people and we need to keep them in mind. And so on with Kabbalah. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, and I want to see if there's any pressing questions before we
I have
wrap
one
this up.
question.
Go for it, Joni.
What is the name? The Radical Judaism?
Mm-hmm.
What is the name of that book?
It's called Radical Judaism. Just look at it.
Radical Judaism.
Yeah. Ezra, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I have a question. So I am not Orthodox, but one of my friends is
Neither am
modern. One of my friends is modern Orthodox, and we talk a lot about various things. And one thing that this friend really tends to get annoyed with is like very like when like modern leftists are like Judaism is so leftist all the time and everything is so progressive. And like that complaint was coming up in my mind when you were talking about Kabbalah, and you were I'm just curious, like the presentation you're giving of like what can we take away from Kabbalah, how that relates to like orthodox understandings of that and lefty understandings of that. You get what I'm getting at?
Yes, I actually have a quote that's going to be in my book that I'm editing now, and like it's also, but it's also in a lot of my source sheets. Let me find one that has it, and then I will share it with you all. Which is a quote from the same person I mentioned before, Rabbi Dr. J. Michelson, when thinking about Kabbalah. And I think that is a good way of looking at it and the way I look at it. Let me just find it. Here we go. So this is from a book called Kabbalah and Queer Theology by Rabbi Dr. J. Michelson. I'll just read it quickly. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Yeah. In the last few decades, Kabbalah has enjoyed an unlikely resurgence. From high-profile celebrities such as Madonna to many New Age seekers, including notably feminist and queer people interested in alternatives to traditional Western religious discourse. And Kabbalah often delivers feminine God language, experiential mysticism, and mythic esotericism, and a richer notion of eros one typically finds in mainline synagogues and churches. Is it possible to attempt a queer reading of Kabbalistic texts and symbolism that are at once honest with the text and yet of use to contemporary queer theology? It's a question. We don't know the answer. And then the whole book of Kabbalah queer theology is basically like you can summarize it as trying to answer that question. And the short answer is, can we? I don't know. Can we? That's a very Kabbalistic way of looking at it in the extent of Kabbalah isn't about yes and no. Kabbalah isn't about the certainty. What I do truly believe, and in a very physical way, I think that anyone who wrote any Jewish text at any point in history was aware that someone is going to come in and reinterpret them. I do think, and that is something that I will fight with anyone who disagrees, I do think that there's no denying that the Kabbalists had a more expansive view of gender and of sexuality than, forget about Orthodoxy today, but even more so of the world as a whole hundreds of years ago. I think there's no denying that. Would they agree with everything we do today? I don't know, but more importantly, I don't care. There's a verse, and one of my favorite verses in the Torah is in Sefer Devarim, Lo bashamayim hi. It's not in heaven. There's a story in the Talmud where, and I've definitely mentioned this in my last class as well, but I will repeat it. Exactly, when the uncle is like, tradition is living, but there's a story in the Talmud where the rabbis are having a disagreement. And there is a majority opinion and a minority opinion. And the minority is just a single rabbi who disagrees, a single rabbi who is the leader, kind of the Nasi, the president of that generation, and he disagrees with the majority. And the rabbis go, you know what, the law is according to the majority, we're going to follow that. And then there's a bat kol, a voice comes out from heaven and says, no, the law is according to that one individual rabbi. And like you have to realize whatever we think about that voice doesn't really matter in this context because the rabbis at least believe that that's the voice of God. It's the closest you can get to, like, I know Christians talk a lot about it. If Jesus himself will come down and tell you, this is the closest you can get to the rabbi's understanding of God physically coming down and telling you what God wants. But do you know what the rabbis say? Torah lo b'shamayim. They're not saying that the bat kol, they're not saying the voice from heaven was wrong. They're not saying it wasn't God. They're saying the Torah is not in heaven. They're literally telling God, you don't own this. You don't own it. Sorry, it's ours. It's not yours. There's a lot of stories like that in Talmud, and Kabbalah really takes that to the next level. Do I know? Am I here to tell you that the Ari was more progressive than half of the politicians in this country? I don't know. I will tell you that I'm 100% convinced he was more progressive than most Orthodox rabbis, if not all Orthodox rabbis today. But that's besides the point, because I do think they were very aware that Judaism is a living journey and a living practice that constantly evolves. I think that's a good way of wrapping this up, because this is hopefully what we're all going to take away. The ideas of Kabbalah and the ideas of Judaism is to look on text, look on traditions, look on physical customs, and making this work, making this a reality in our day-to-day lives. So take some of it to your Seder, take some of it to your Shabbat, to your day-to-day life, And thank you all so much for joining us. And hopefully it might be after Pesach. Maybe I'll try to get something out before Pesach, at least with the Seder. But I'll try to share by email some more details. And thank you all so much for being here today. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
this.
so much, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you. Incredible.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Joni, maybe we'll have to do a Kabbalah 102. Yeah. Thank you all
I
so
do.
much.
I'm not kidding either.
Thank you. Chag
I
Sameach,
would
everyone.
love
Chag
to.
Sameach.
Yeah.
Okay,
Chag
we'll see.
Sameach. Thank you.